So, I said to myself, I want to write a piece of music. What now? So, welcome to the 100th video of this channel. Hey! Thank you for your support. If you've been following the channel for a while, thank you for some of the feedback that you've given on videos. Thank you to the trolls for keeping me on my toes. No, there haven't been too many trolls. But yeah, I think it's a lovely thing to celebrate. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed most about making this channel is just having an excuse to do little silly compositions, little off-the-cuff things, making music, or just even little micro pieces of music purely for the fun of it. I think just being able to make pieces purely for myself has been a lovely complement to the kind of work that I normally do day to day when I'm composing for projects and things. Normally when a project comes and lands on my desk, at my virtual desk email inbox thingy, it's got quite an established aesthetic maybe, or perhaps there's even temp music in there that feels like what I do needs to be quite respectful of the sort of aesthetic decisions that have already been made. It doesn't always feel like I can just dive in there and do something completely wacky, although sometimes I get a bit more creative autonomy. Very often the sort of reality, or sort of my reality of being a professional composer means putting my musical ego to one side slightly and using the technical skills that I have to serve a client fundamentally. Doing this YouTube channel has just made me really appreciate spending some time kind of nurturing that aspect of my creative spirit that likes to just make things that are interesting and for no particular reason other than that. And to kind of explore my own sense of what beautiful is, or what interesting is, or what humorous is, you know. So in that spirit, I wanted to share the journey of a piece of music that I made along those lines. So this video is all about just writing music with that open brief. The number one thing that comes to mind when I think about this type of composing that's a bit more open-ended is there's this looming question which sort of hangs over every creative choice, which is, who cares? And that's a really important question when it comes to art and making and creativity. And I think it needs to be taken seriously, but it can also just have this effect of shutting down and blocking. And I've certainly, had many occasions where I've sort of started on some little passion project and then kind of just this voice in my head has gotten too loud. Who cares? Nobody cares. Just go back to doing something useful, and then I've just sort of slightly run out of steam and nothing's come of it. So this is the kind of quest that I feel like I'm going on with this piece, contending with that question, that question of who cares, and trying to kind of come up with a response or just even ignore it and act in the face of that question. I don't know. So you can judge for yourself whether or not the piece itself was a success. I think I quite like it. So I said to myself, I want to write a piece of music. What now? The very start of the creative process I like to think of as visualization. I was trying to see the end product in my mind, and I did spend quite a lot of time just sitting and specifically making some notes on a notepad app, but really trying to hear a sound in my head that I would be excited about after finishing the piece, that I would think, oh, that would be cool. I guess it's like the whole first part of the process was like trying to answer the question or trying to complete the sentence, it would be cool if ... One of the things that I started to think about was who I might like to collaborate with. I'm surrounded by so many amazing musicians here in London, so if nothing else, even if the piece is a complete failure, let's just get some great musicians on it. The first person that I thought of was Rich Blake, who's been on this channel before, just because, we're a similar age, we've been mates for a long time, and I knew that he'd be up for trying something a little bit experimental maybe. And we had a conversation previously, which was about a potential collaboration, but more in a live context, where he talked about the idea of using his live trumpet with some kind of real-time effects. because I've always been quite interested in processing that specifically has to do with evoking space. I think, it's one of the reasons why I feel quite suited to working on VR projects, because I love the way that music can suggest a kind of environment, either subtly or quite literally, using different audio processing techniques to make something feel distant, or to create artificial echoes, or just to kind of veil the sound slightly as if it's behind something or as if it's just further away. I love that aspect of just sonics. I find it really fascinating how you can kind of have this sense of depth perception in sound. So that's something that's kind of, I guess, a pet interest of mine. So I wrote something like that down. So I was thinking maybe chamber ensemble size, maybe a couple of instruments, maybe some processing or some other kind of production elements, such as sound design or some reverb tails or something like that. And I also was thinking a little bit about the fact that I'm quite interested in getting into more indie film. And I thought, it'd be cool to write something that I could show to a director and be like, here's something that I made, and maybe they'd be inspired, or maybe it would just be an opportunity to showcase something that's a bit more personal. I guess I was thinking a bit about maybe writing something that wouldn't feel out of place in some kind of indie film. I wrote down also a specific name. There's a guy called Daniel Herskedal, I think his name is. He's an incredible brass player who makes these really atmospheric, very cinematic pieces. So I'd written down, Daniel Herskedal vibes as a sort of rough, possible direction to go in, but kind of leaving it a little bit open-ended at the same time. I was specifically thinking about delay plugins and how, with delay plugins you can affect the amount of time between the delays. I thought, well, what if the delay was more of like a character, and maybe the delays kind of intentionally speeding up and slowing down could be like a musical performance rather than just like an effect that you sort of slap on the instrument. I also thought that it might be a cool way to kind of fill up some space in the piece if I was going to keep the number of instruments relatively small. So all of this is to say that I spent about the first 3 or 4 hours of the creative process just going through loads of different tools, loads of different delay plugins. I explored some of the Sound Toys ones, Timeless by FabFilter, Paul Stretch, some of the Logic stock delays, just kind of on this quest for the ability to affect delay time in real time. It was actually a lot harder than I anticipated to be able to manipulate the timing of the delays in real time without there being audible artifacts. Oftentimes the pitch would wobble or you'd get some kind of grainy sounds. It turns out that actually just this thing of doing like a delay that goes ba-da, 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 and being able to control that speed in real time actually requires some quite sophisticated time stretching. I was really struggling. And this whole first part of the creative process, as often is the case, it was a little bit sluggish. Like I had this initial spark of like, oh, it'd be cool if, and then I started to hit wall after wall. Nothing was quite doing what I wanted, and it was so disappointing. I just thought, oh, if I could just find this tool, then I could just kind of get going with it straight away, and it's going to inspire another idea, and that'll inspire another idea. But no, there was this kind of initial inertia. And of course, all the while in the back of my head, there's sort of a voice saying, "Oh, just give up," or just, who cares? And I was able to kind of recognize that, okay, I'm not getting anywhere. This is a bit of a block now, and it's probably better that I just try and sort of crash forward in whatever way I can. Let me just try that one phrase. I still don't quite know where this is going, but I like the idea of these sparse phrases and then leaving loads of space, and I'll just create the echoes manually. Bum, bum 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 bum. Perhaps in the recording session, I give him a delay in his headphones that sort of approximates what I'm going for. But then in the post-production, then I get really hands dirty with creating manual delays using audio editing and really feature and kind of craft the delays in a really intentional way. I think that's quite interesting. The next stage of the creative process for me was where it all started to coalesce a bit. And this was in some ways the kind of the core of the writing, which was I just started to sketch. I initially started by just improvising at the piano, which is one of my kind of go-to ways of getting an idea off the ground. Often that's because I find for me the harmony is quite important. So exploring the right harmonic sound world feels like a way to just find a bit of focus. I guess playing some chords and then seeing if that kind of matches the sound or the atmosphere that's in my head. And I guess all this time that I've been thinking about delays and this idea of having these kind of echoey phrases, that naturally started to lead me to a place that was also a bit more harmonically ambiguous or floaty. Something like that. Do 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 do. Something like that. No, I want to build momentum first. Yeah. Ah, lost it. Yeah. That's nice. At this point, I decided to reach for an organ sound. I knew that I wanted something with a droney, quite full pad-like sound, and I didn't want to start adding in sampled strings or anything like that. That felt like it would make it a bit unfocused. I liked the idea of doing something that I could achieve live, and I knew that there was an organ in the main studio here that I could use and record. So that was my main reason for choosing that sound. I needed something to play a particular musical function, and I was thinking about the sounds that were available to me. I committed to that at that stage. Similarly, at some point while sketching, I realised I needed to start filling out the low end, and so immediately I just instinctively went for my Moog, just because that's got fantastic low end beef. I actually went quite far with the synth and started to even add some kind of strange white noise kind of sweeps and things, which were adding into the right kind of mysterious, slightly cinematic sound world. However, after getting to a point where I was quite happy with the structure and the main elements in the piece, and after shutting down my computer and leaving the studio, and literally after just closing the door of the studio and double locking it, I immediately had a flood of creative inspiration, as often happens at that kind of point in time when I've completely relaxed and let go of trying to come up with creative ideas. It suddenly became blindingly apparent that the synth was the wrong choice, that it was dragging the piece in too much of a sci-fi or sort of slightly unstable kind of direction, and I wanted it to have this really natural, more organic kind of sound. So I just instinctively knew that the next time I sat down, I was going to have to replace that synth with double bass instead, because that would have the right amount of bite to the sound that I liked from the synth, but it would just have this more dark kind of woody character that, for whatever reason, it just felt like a better choice. What I did is I actually got out my phone immediately after leaving the studio and just got out the Notepad app and just immediately started writing down lots of ideas. Double bass much better than synth, bit of air and bite, maybe some free tempo bow strokes if the composition permits. Make it nice and fat somehow. And then I've written airy, reflective silver trumpet / flugel with a warm textured, authentic woody bed. Using artificial repeats, but expressively time shifting is interesting. Therefore, make it clear to the listener that that's what's happening by contriving character takes with imperfections, which you then hear repeated verbatim. So in other words, I was saying to myself, when I'm recording the trumpet, it might be good if there are a few little kind of strange noises in there or slight idiosyncrasies, because then when you hear the repeats, you're going to hear it as a delay, whereas you might otherwise hear it as a second trumpet part, somebody playing a kind of an imitative part. I like the idea of actually hearing the repeat as a copy. I also wrote down some notes that I didn't end up following, such as it would be better as 3-note groupings rather than 2-note groupings, referring to the way that I'd structured the melody as ba-ba, ba-ba, kind of 2-note groups rather than ba-ba-da, 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 ba-ba-da. you know, at that point I thought, oh, it'd be better with threes because that might make a more kind of ornamental, interesting, flowing sound. After kind of coming back to the piece, I actually decided to stick with my original idea. First of all, there's a bit more space to the composition with twos, and also there's something about that trumpet interval that just feels very classic and quite familiar. It felt a little bit more sort of narratively compelling, having those little kind of fanfare-esque two-note jumps. And then it was all about just starting to think about the practicalities of how to approach the recording. I decided that it would be a good idea to ultimately do the echoes in post-production using audio editing, but I wanted to have Rich, the trumpet player, be able to hear the full piece kind of as he was recording it. So I wanted him to be able to hear the expressive delays that were happening. The best solution I could come up with at the time was just to basically sing to him in his headphones as he was playing what I imagined the delays would do. And then I also thought, oh, actually, I could just record my voice at the same time and then use the vocal track as a guide for where to place the delays. So we would have a bit of a kind of musical conversation, which I would then recreate using copy and pasted parts of his trumpet. Of course, before being able to record it, I needed to get it down in some form of notation that we could use in the session. And this proved to be a little bit of a challenge, partly because me being me, when I said to myself, oh, I can write whatever I want, I immediately wrote something very free and with absolutely no concern for tempo or time signatures. Basically, I just sketched very freely with no grid or anything. I think just because that's something I don't get to do as much as I would like on regular projects. And I'm a big fan of styles of music where there's a very loose time feel. I love free jazz and I love, you know, ambient music where things are just very organically hanging together in a way that makes sense but isn't that easy to pin down. And so that was the direction I was going in, but it was an absolute nightmare to score out. The first stage was in the DAW. I used markers to try and mark where I was hearing the time signature changes. It wasn't always obvious where the pulse was, and it was very open to interpretation. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's a 4 there. I also challenged myself to use Dorico, which I'm still using. I don't use Sibelius at all now, just because I've had some bad experiences in the past with Sibelius and I wanted to try something new. But I'm still not very familiar with it, so it actually took quite a bit of time to get the music into Dorico. And you can kind of fermata that, I guess. Not quite sure how you do that. Shift H. For what does Shift H do? Holds pauses and popovers. I ended up doing some little crescendo and decrescendo style markings here, just as a way of indicating to myself when to do the delays and whether to speed up or slow down. The first thing we did was we just listened to the track, my mock-up, together, and I just talked a bit about what was going through my head, the kind of things that I was exploring, the kind of mood that I had in mind, the fact that I wanted it to have this kind of quite improvised feel. Rich was incredibly open and up for a challenge as well, and as always he brought loads of ideas to the table. In particular, there was one section in the sort of middle of the piece where I knew that I wanted to sound improvised, and I wanted him to inject a bit of his own improvisatory skill. Love it.
Thanks.
Well, I should get you to write all of my music.
Yeah, and you put it perfectly in basically C major for me, which is the best, with the easiest noodly scalic thing, so thank you.
It was really this kind of a bit of a collage of different takes in the end, but in quite an intentional way. It really felt like we were building something together. In the final section of the piece, I knew that I wanted to get really big. What we ended up doing was actually using a different mouthpiece for the last section of the piece.
Basically, it'll be useless for the quiet stuff, but you might get more of a
Screamier sound for the second one.
I wanted the trumpet to kind of be leading everything else. So I provided a bit of harmony, but basically I gave Rich full control over the timing and the phrasing, with the idea that I would then reconstruct the piece around his performance. So almost capturing that improvisation spirit, you know, and then using that as the grid. I think I really value those recording sessions where it's more of a conversation rather than it being more of a top-down approach. It also really helps, again, with this question of who cares, because up until this point, it's just been this solo venture. Having Rich on board with it, enthusiastic, engaging with it with his imagination, bringing his own kind of flair to it, just sitting down at the pub and feeling like we've both created something quite cool. You know, it just helps to kind of validate the whole experience and make it, I don't know, just confirm that we're on the right track. The next stage in the process was to get the double bass recorded. This actually was a little bit of a disaster. Not the recording itself, but my preparation for it. Basically, on the day of the recording, I'd left it a little bit last minute, and I arrived at the studio, opened my backpack, and realised I forgot to bring my laptop, which is like my main studio computer. So I thought, oh no, how am I going to write the score? You know, the guy's arriving. I had no way of recording and I hadn't written a score and he was just going to show up and there'd be nothing to do. Luckily, because I'm in a shared studio space here, there is another studio on the other side of this this separation here, on the other side of the booth. But still, I had no score. So what I ended up doing, rather than trying to download Dorico on this other machine and kind of fiddle around with it, I knew that was going to slow me down. I actually just ended up annotating the trumpet score. So basically I just wrote some chord symbols above the trumpet lead line, which actually turned out not to be a terrible way to notate the score. It was kind of ended up just being a quick fix, but it made sense for the bassist to follow the trumpet part as he was recording. It's a very simple bass part, just holding down the root notes for the most part. And then I just literally notated, like I've written here, super high harmonics, F sharp to D to A. I mean, this is terrible. Don't do this, especially with a pro bass player, Dave Brown. I'm sorry. Amazing guy, and my first time working with him. Such a consummate professional, great sound, brought loads of ideas to the table, and actually didn't bat an eyelid at this monstrosity of a score. But I just kind of basically scribbled some ideas on this. I just banked on him being a pro and kind of getting on with it, and that's exactly what happened. I actually ended up showing Dave the waveform of Rich's performance as he was recording it, and that allowed him to anticipate when certain notes were going to happen, in the same way that he would if Rich was standing there and he might go like that to indicate. So that ended up being quite a handy technique. I just had so much fun exploring the different sonic possibilities of the bass, especially on some of the harmonics, hearing the harmonics at different octaves, you know, considering it in the context of the piece, different speeds of playing, different ways of applying pressure to the bow.
That's nice, even like a Baroque style. Yeah.
I've almost given up on the goal of learning every aspect of every instrument, just because it's so pleasurable to sort of turn up as a bit of a beginner and be like, well, I kind of thought that it might be cool if we did this phrase like slightly scratchier. What do you think? And how could we achieve that? And then finding the solution that best fits. Because each musical situation is so different, and it's just so much fun. At this point, there was a bit of a break. Everything kind of shut down for Christmas and New Year, and I sort of forgot about the piece for quite a long time, which was both helpful and unhelpful. But the first thing I did when I came back was sort of kickstart the new year by recording the live Hammond organ in the beautiful Crypt studio upstairs. There was nobody around, and I just had the whole place to myself. I got some beautiful Cole microphones, self-recording in that room. You know, I just had a little interface with my laptop, and I was just self-engineering as I was going along. But before I did that, I needed a way to notate the score. What I actually ended up doing was using markers again. I just mapped out the different chord voicings and made a kind of mental note of exactly the notes that had been played in the MIDI. In Logic, I just muted the organ, the fake organ part, and then using the markers along the top kind of rehearsed my performance with the piece and looking at the chord symbols. My approach to recording the Leslie speaker of the Hammond was, I knew I wanted a stereo pair so that I would get some of that modulation kind of happening in stereo of the rotating cone inside. It's what kind of creates that really cool modulation, is there's something rotating inside which blocks the sound emitting from the cabinet, so you get this kind of very interesting left-right effect. I actually had to use some just random items around the studio to like place on some of the keys or on some of the pedals so that they would continue to play a sound while I then kind of moved my head around and listened. That was my main way of approaching recording the Hammond. It's a very powerful instrument, so I had to spend a lot of time hunting around the studio finding all of the things that were buzzing and resonating whenever I played the low C. So that took a little bit of time. So just trying to get the sound right at the source, I guess that was my goal. I'm still pretty new to the Hammond organ, definitely new at the concept of playing with my feet. And I just took some time to make sure I understood everything that was going on, how to manipulate the tone of the organ. So you have these stops that you can pull out, and basically they affect the different overtones of the sound. So if you want a really kind of bright, kind of more tinny sound, you can pull out all the higher stops. If you want to round out and mellow down the tone, you can push some of them in. So you have quite a lot of timbral control as you're playing. I almost wanted to challenge the listener to hear the sound of the organ in a slightly different context. I don't know, that sounds like quite a grand aim, I suppose. I wasn't really thinking about it that hard, but it's one of the things that I like about this track is that you're hearing that colour, but it really is just a colour. It feels like it's not there to signify church, if you know what I mean, and it feels like quite a fresh sound in that context to me. At this kind of later part of the creative process, when a lot of the decisions feel like they've already been made, it's always quite surprising that there are still kind of new ideas or little transformations that happen. One of the things that happened while I was recording the organ part was that it sounds really insignificant and small, but I changed a C minor chord to a C minor flat 5 because there's an F sharp in the melody, or a G flat. And previously I just had that clash going on, you know, which was cool. I'd chosen it because it was quite like a spicy note. I thought, yeah, I'm going to put a spicy note in there because no client's here to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to tell me to take it out. Then when I was there and I was playing the organ part, it just felt like there's enough here. There's enough tension. There's enough kind of interest going on with the live organ. It doesn't feel like you need such a spicy clash.
Yeah, I prefer that.
It just felt like everything kind of clicked into focus a little bit more. At every stage of the process, there were little things that just seemed to transform it, and in small but quite profound ways. Those kinds of moments feel like little encouragements, both encouragements to, again, just swat away that pesky who cares thought bubble, but also to just help me through some of the more mundane, almost more admin type parts of the process which just are required to get the thing finished, to get a line drawn under it. So now I had all of the pieces that I needed, and all that was required was really just to sit down and do some editing, just make sure that everything was kind of conforming, everything was in the right place. I didn't do much processing. It was actually at this point that I started to finalize the timing of the delays, build the delays, and just assemble all of the different pieces, including the live parts. I've got this map in my head of how it's supposed to be, and now the job is just realizing it, just kind of fixing everything that's obviously wrong with it. You know, that's often the biggest challenge with mixing, is just fix the obvious stuff. It's not really a challenge, it's almost quite easy, but the challenge is to kind of really be honest with yourself and you know, hold yourself to account. Have you really fixed everything that you think you can fix? Having the track mixed externally at a high level was something that I had on my agenda, I think, from quite early on, because one of my goals with this project was to really follow through, make a track that's as high quality as I can possibly manage, and have that track be kind of an open brief. It was important to me not to sort of take my foot off the gas at the last minute and try and mix it myself. It's humbling, but like I always know that my mixes are never as good as somebody who just mixes, you know, that's their whole thing. They just mix for a living. And I know that Tom's got incredible ears, and he's also got great taste and a real openness to these kinds of slightly more experimental pieces. I tried to give him lots of options in the stems, so I gave him dry stems as well as affected stems.
I mean, to me, it just, you know, it just needs a bit of sort of more character to the sound, especially to the trumpet. And,
yeah.
And then the only kind of question I had about like anything sort of remotely substantive was, I think about 40 seconds in, there's like a sustained organ bit sort of on its own, and then there's a little pause. Yeah, the first time I listened, I was like, does something kind of need to happen here? Like, probably just in a production sense, does it need a little reverb tail, or I don't know. But then equally, do you want it just to be as it is? And I'd be curious to know what you thought about that.
Yeah, possibly like the organ could sort of decrescendo slightly.
Right.
I guess the intention is like, I was thinking of it as a little bit like a concert piece. You know, so sort of you'd imagine that like, you know, end of the first section and kind of have a slight moment.
I did get that sense, yeah. You can imagine some wrestling and a couple of coughs.
And when I heard the mixed version, I was just so happy because it really felt like, once again, he'd kind of taken what I'd laid down and just kind of run with it and made it even more like itself. You know, at this point, it didn't even feel like my track anymore. It's like the track kind of required certain things, and I felt like Tom was able to give it what it needed to sound full, to sound exciting, to sound immediate, but also to have loads of dynamic range. So I was super happy. The only tweaks I had, and this is often the case, was related to things that were decisions on my end. Because there was so much extra clarity in what I was hearing in the mixed version, it made me want to go back to the stems and make one or two small tweaks, just to tweak some of the way that I'd recorded the organ. I did a little bit of clever time stretching Melodyne style. I love how Melodyne just lets you reach inside music and fiddle around with it. Absolutely incredible. So here's the track that we came up with. I've gone for the title of Blakean Delays. I didn't think too hard about the title, as you could probably tell. It was just something that I needed, you know, early on to name my Logic file. I didn't really feel like it mattered too much as long as the track title wasn't way off or too distracting. Blakean Delays felt kind of fairly open-ended, and anyway, I hope you enjoy this piece. I certainly had fun creating it, and here's the finished result.